Welcome, everyone. I'm George McGonigal and president of Questar Construction, and I am this year's chair of the board of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. We're excited today to have members of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce, the Manatee Chamber of Commerce, and the Lakewood Ranch Business Alliance all here together to hear from the state's Chief Financial Officer, Jeff Atwater. You know, a lot of our issues that face our businesses today are regional. And so it's fitting that we've brought these three groups together for the second month in a row to hear from a state officer. Before we begin the program, I'd like to ask you all to join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. As you guys get comfortable again, I'd like to invite State Representative Jim Boyd to come up and introduce our guest speaker for the day.
Thank you, George. I think the chief thought he was going to get lunch, but you're going to work for your lunch, sir. Thank you very much. It is an honor and a privilege to introduce our guest speaker today. And I want to tell you a little bit about him. And I've got some notes because I don't want to miss anything, because he is a very, very fine man, and I don't want to leave anything out there that you don't know about him. Jeff is a fifth-generation Floridian, a husband, and a father of four. He was first elected to Chief Financial Officer of our great state in 2010 when many of us came into the legislature, and sworn in January of 2011. He was reelected to a second term November 4th of 14. His commitment, however, to public service began in 1993 when his hometown of North Palm Beach elected him vice mayor. Mr. Atwater was subsequently elected to the Florida House of Representatives, the Florida Senate in 2002, and in 2008 he was unanimously selected by his peers in the Senate to serve them as their president. Jeff's family has a long and distinguished commitment to public service, both at local, municipal, and state levels. Family values of fairness, stewardship of the public trust, and an unshakable faith in the American ethos has informed his sense of duty and responsibility in all facets of his public and private career. He earned his bachelor's degree in finance and MBA from the University of Florida. That's the one thing that I'm not going to hold against him. Go Noles. His private sector experiences, which included 25 years in the community banking business, provide him a unique and valuable perspective on the sacrifices and challenges facing the businessmen and women of Florida. CFO Atwater is also very engaged in community service and organizations that serve our communities on a volunteer basis, from United Way to Chamber of Commerce, Big Brothers and Sisters, Take Stock in Children, and many others. But most of all, Jeff Atwater is a friend, and he's a very, very good friend to all of us in the state of Florida. I can just give you one anecdote. We were working together on a bill when I first got up there, and it was kind of on the ropes. It was the automobile insurance reform, and he called me. He said, "Jim, would you be willing to come down and have a sandwich with me tomorrow night with Joe Negron, who was also working on the Senate side? I think we can get this thing worked into shape." And anyway, at his leadership, we got kind of some agreement on the bill and got it back on track, and we were able to pass it, which I think has had tremendous results for the state of Florida, and hopefully he'll speak to how his involvement in that has saved Floridians money. But Jeff never leaves a conversation with anyone that I've seen without asking what he can do for you, and he truly means it. He is a great public servant, a great friend, and our CFO, so please help me welcome Jeff Atwater.
That's as kind as it gets, Jim. Thank you so much. That is as kind as it gets. So if you want to come back up later, Jim, and finish. What a pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to share some things, and I'll probably go quickly through these. I know because our time is limited. But if there's anything that I would hope you might take from what Jim shared, I spent 25 years in the banking business, which meant I was knocking on your door, calling on you to see if the institution I was a part of could add value to your business model. And across those 25 years, I saw the extraordinary perseverance and sacrifice of individuals to build something unique and special. They'd hire neighbors. They would offer speed or unique value propositions. They'd compete in a marketplace. And it was just so impressive to see it every day that did inform how I look at things and how I look at the world, and why I chose to run for office when I saw how many times I was observing inefficiencies in government and red tape in government that was standing in the way of innovative, creative ideas to help change communities. And so you'll probably detect that as I converse with you today. So let me share with you, there's really two things I'd like to share. You might call it the tale of two governments. And not long ago, Kevin DeLallo had me share some of these thoughts that I'm going to share today. We put them together, but there was a question that was asked, what about our federal government? So I'd like to lay these as best I can side by side. So what I'm going to show you is this theory that discipline, fiscal discipline, attracts capital, whether in the private sector, when someone watches what you're building and creating, they'll say, I want to be a part of that because I can see discipline getting from conception ultimately to delivery. And that is so true, too, that if you have a value proposition in the private sector, you should expect your government has a value proposition to offer. And no more, no less, deliver upon those promises. So what I'm going to show you is a walk through 10 years of decision making. Decisions have consequences. Money that's extracted from your pocket to come to government only can be deployed one time. And did you get what you were hoping to get for it? Or were we inefficient with that money? Did we come back and ask for more? Have we had boundary creep beyond our constitutional responsibilities and duties? So I'm going to show you 10 years across time, those decisions and what has happened because of those decisions. What's been the marketplace reaction? And then, to the best of my ability, I'd like to show you some thoughts of our federal government. If I can finish fast enough, we'll take some questions, and I hope it's not about the election. So here we go. Let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm your state treasurer, so I'm responsible for being efficient, so I brought one slide. That's it. I hope you can see it from where you're sitting. I can tell now maybe this is a bit awkward. But I'll explain it as we go. This is the one slide we're going to show, just across time. So what you can see is I'm going to plot all 50 states on this graph. On the y-axis, or the left side, or the third base line, or the vertical axis, is I'm going to chart the state's debt in relation to all the income of that state, a ratio that you have when you go to borrow for a car loan, your debt to income ratio. That's going to be on the left-hand side. Plotted across the x-axis, or the first baseline, or the horizontal axis, is the taxes extracted per individual per state, taxes on a per capita basis. So we're going to plot all 50 states. So let's take a look. These are first our peers. Like anything else in business, who am I most like? Size, geography, diversity. So there they have it. Our states, our peer group states, just as you would again have a peer competitor, are Texas, California, New York, Illinois. Those are by size, by shape, by diversity. Those would be our peers. And there is everybody else on that graph. Now what I'm going to do is show you if I took and made the debt, that vertical axis, the size of their bubble, proportionate to their outstanding debt, because it is a load that the people of those states are carrying. So to put this in perspective, the top bubble to the right that is large in size is Hawaii. Just down to the left is Massachusetts, and to the right is Connecticut. Those are states with the highest debt placed upon the backs of their citizens that they now have to carry in all the decision making that they're making. And then you can see it moves down to the smaller circles down in the left-hand corner. Now, I think if we all just said, if every state could have the same outstanding performance in education, the same safe streets, the same quality of health care, where would you want your dot to be? You'd want to be lower left, extracting as little as you had to from the marketplace, burdening future generations as little as possible with debt, but still delivering quality. Now, by the time of my presentation today, I can't cover education, public safety, or health care. But it would be a fair question to ask, okay? So I just want to lay that out. This is just about fiscal discipline. So now I'm going to put this in motion. I'm going to hit the clicker and it's going to start to move. And I want you to think about what's going to happen. In 04, 05, and 06, we had a strong moving economy. So when you had income growing very fast, in states that are income tax driven, like New York, New Jersey, California, of course they're tax driven in every capacity, but they are also, Florida is not an income tax, we are a consumption tax state. So when people are buying in a strong economy, you're going to see those bubbles begin to move to the right. That shouldn't surprise you in these particular years. It's what's going to happen after we stop the slide in 2006 that I think you're going to be a bit surprised. Up in the upper left-hand corner of each slide is going to be just a headline from a periodical or newspaper talking about the events of the time. So here we go. Watch what happens, the decision-making that's going to be taking place 04, 05, 06, and I'll stop it there. So here we go. There's our peer group states, and off we go. The U.S. job market is soaring. So you can see income is coming in faster than the per capita growth in population. A perfect GDP report. Economy is going strong. We get to 2006. Economic growth is rising sharply. Here's just some facts about Florida in 2006. Our top line revenue, just like you have top line revenue, the difference is you earn your top line revenue. We just take it from you. So top line revenue for the state of Florida was $27 billion. That's sales tax, that's corporate tax, that's dock stamps on real estate transaction, all in $27 billion. Population 18 million. That year, 325,000 people moved to Florida. About 900 people a day. The median price of a home that year was $247, single-family residential home. There were 50,000 homes on the market that year from a willing seller. Housing permits, 149,000 new housing permits were issued that year for housing starts. Unemployment rate 3.2%, and we had a AAA credit rating, the best you can have. Okay, looking around the room, I know you were around in 2006, and I'd hate to put you through this yet one more time, but I'm going to hit the clicker. Watch what begins to happen. See the contraction that begins with these states. Okay, here we go. 2007. Is Florida over, writes the Wall Street Journal. And it's contracting. U.S. to face poor economy for 10 to 15 years. U.S. economy plummets. And here we now are in 2009. Jim mentioned in his bio that I was unanimously elected Senate President. Well, with that going on, nobody else wanted the job. So top line revenue now has collapsed 23%. We've lost $6 billion between those two clicks in top line revenue. But this is, I'll get to this more in a moment. But if we lost 23%, what did you lose? How much did you lose in top line revenue? 125,000 people moved to Florida that year. That's a 60% drop in population growth rate. Median price of a home is now $145. That's a 41% drop in the value of homes exchanging hands. It was 50,000 homes on the market in 2006. Now it's 517,000 homes in foreclosure. Homes now on the market is 166, and again, you add to that the 517 in foreclosure. Housing permits, remember that was 149, it's down to 27,000. Unemployment was 3.2, now it's 10.5. It's going to hit 11.5, almost 11.5 in about 10 more months. Our AAA credit rating is still AAA, but they've now informed us that they've got us on a watch. So that's where we're at in 2009. All of us are there. Here's what's important. What is the choices that you make? How do you see the problem? And that's where now, when I start hitting the clicker, you're going to see the choices that were made. Everybody is in the same boat. Every county, every school board, every city, and every state. And of course, more importantly, every private sector player that is the real owner and driver of our economy is in the same position. So what choice will you make? A lot of folks were asking us, how do you fill the $6 billion hole? How are you going to fill the $6 billion hole? When are you going to fill the $6 billion hole? You've got to fill the $6 billion hole. How are you going to fill the $6 billion hole? It was pretty consistent questions that were being asked of me. So here we go. Now watch what happens if you can keep one eye on Florida and let your other eye just watch how the rest of the graph is going to go. And here we go. California starts borrowing money. Illinois gets into the act. Big tax hike, killing businesses in New York. 10 large companies now leaving Illinois. Now they're raising taxes. New York's raising taxes. California gets into the act. Not quite Greece, but California's getting close. Finally, good news for Florida's economy. Florida's lowering taxes, lowering its debt. Has Florida found the secret to saving its economy? So here it would have been today. This is the 2014 and how we're all plotted, but to the right is actual numbers as of the fiscal year that just ended in Florida this past summer, the summer of 16. So we're all the way back. Top line revenue is now $29 billion. Population has grown again. It's now growing at 365,000 people a year. 20 million people, that's now surpassing New York. We're now the third largest state in the union, 1,000 people a day. Median prices of homes are now up 50% from where they were. Not yet back to where they were at the height, but who's in a big hurry? Inventories are now down to 4 months. Homes on the market significantly down. Foreclosures significantly down. Permits up. Unemployment now back down to 4.7%, not yet down to 3.5%. And the AAA credit rating is fine. No watch any longer in place. Between those two clicks was the choices that people made. And the decision that people in government made. Was the hole on our books more important than the hole in your books? Was it my job to go find $6 billion? Or was it our job to see what we could do to, instead of increasing revenue $6 billion, decrease spending $6 billion? And that was the choice that was made. Between those two clicks, 28 states raised taxes more than $100 per head. 26 states raised their debt. 18 states did both. 1 state in the country did neither. And that would be the state of Florida. The opinion of those who you asked to serve you was that the problem on your books was more important than the problem on our books. And if we could be disciplined and create the fastest possible conditions for an economic recovery, that is the best thing that we could do for you. And that if we did that, you would do what you've always done. You would pick us up, you'd put us on your back, and you'd carry us forward. You have done this. This is not a Tallahassee story. This is your story. And I'll tell you who I'd like to thank, because 2 of them are in the audience, for making very tough decisions when they weren't getting any particular help from everybody outside throwing stones. Greg Stubbe and Jim Boyd made the decision to reduce our spending, not take more out of your pocket, to call on me to reduce our debt, to not place that on another generation, and to let this economy get rolling. And now you're the #1 job creator of any state in the country for the past 3 years. Will you join me in thanking these 2 guys? Thanks, Greg. Well done. Well done. It wasn't popular. It wasn't popular. So why does this matter? Let me show you some other indicators. This, by the way, this is where we once were. Remember how clustered we all were? We were all within $1,000 in per capita taxes, and now it's over $2,000 in per capita taxes. And when it gets to that extreme, when people have stressed themselves out on their models, it's going to matter to where people are going to deploy capital. This is the credit ratings. This is how we can borrow money on your behalf when we have to build a dormitory or a chemistry building or a highway. We are a AAA rated state. There are 15 states in the country that are AAA rated. Their colors are green. There are the other remaining states, 32, would be the gold color. They are the AA rated state, which would be the 2nd best rating. 2 states, which would be New Jersey and Kentucky, are single A rated. That would be what we would have normally thought would be the lowest. But Illinois has outperformed itself, and it's now BBB, and it's 1 rating away from being junk. That's the situation that they're in. Florida is bigger than the state of New York. We have $24 billion in debt outstanding. They have $54 billion in debt outstanding. If the state of New York had our credit rating, they would save $1.3 billion a year just on their interest expense. Just on their interest expense. Every single year. That is 32,000 K through 12 teachers every single year. That is a highway from Miami to Tampa every single year. That's not in the budget because of that choice that they made over that time. That's the difference of discipline. That's why it matters to you. If they ever ask me to borrow money on your behalf, I can borrow it at the least expensive price of anybody in the country when they look at this. So why else does it matter? Not only can we be more efficient for what's ahead and be more flexible, what is the marketplace saying? This slide might look a little confusing, but on the top right-hand side, over on the far right-hand side, are the states that over that same 10-year horizon have attracted household income, and to what extent they have attracted household income. This is not about a retiree's portfolio. This is household income on a W-2. We were able to get this from the IRS. Couldn't get their emails, but we were able to get this data. I know that was kind of cheap. So Florida, #1 state in the country for attracting household income. That is $18 million a day coming to Florida. $7.5 billion every year coming to Florida. That's growing our economy. New York is losing $5 billion a year from their economy every year. Now this matters. 70% of all GDP, 70% of all economic activity happens when a consumer reaches for their wallet to buy something. And when you keep chasing your economy out of your state, the future gets very bleak. And when you go back to the previous slides of where their taxes and their debt already was located, it becomes really significant. So the winners, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Arizona, South Carolina, you can see proportionally where we stand. Significant difference of choice that's being made of people coming to Florida to live their dreams. This was just another way of showing states to the left are the winners, top 2, Florida, Texas. States to the right would be the losers, top 3, our peer group. Illinois, California, New York, all chasing households, innovators, professionals out of their state. If I put them both together, top credit ratings, most flexible and agile states, along with top performers in attracting capital. Interesting that they're all in the lower left-hand corner. And it's not a Southern thing. It may be a philosophical thing, but it's not a Southern thing. People are going to places where they believe they can invest money, have a chance, build a life, have dreams, and be successful. And they're growing economies. And that's why that matters. So let me just show you another way of looking at this from the outside. How do we stack up? There are 5 indicators I just want to show you. Job growth, GDP growth, tax climate, fiscal condition, and what we call the Freedom Index. The first 2, starting from left to the right, the first 2 are indicators of what happens when you have the 3 that are to follow to the right. So right now, we have a 3.3% private sector job growth. Now, when you're already 20 million people on a ratio basis, that's hard to do, to be top 3 when you're already that big. But on a pure job creation number, we're #1 in private sector job creation because of you 3 years running. And you can see where our peer group is. In GDP, all economic growth, you can see that among our peer group we rank #1, but again, an economy our size, Florida's economy now ranks the 16th largest economy in the world. So between Saudi Arabia and Mexico. That's how big this engine is. We're ranking #1 in our peer group, 2.3%, about twice the national average, which is not something to cheer about. We want a strong economy. We are all Americans before we are Floridians. But you can see Illinois is actually contracting. Texas is barely alive. And New York is under 1%. Those are really anemic numbers. But it's because of, if you can run the state efficiently, the tax climate, this is how the Tax Foundation ranks all states. Florida, #4 in the country, then Texas, then you would see California and New York ranked 48th and 49th. Illinois is still trying to solve their hole. And the Speaker of the Illinois House has just proposed increasing personal taxes 3-fold. If they are accomplishing that, and maybe you're pulling for them, if they accomplish that, they will drop to join California and New York. And another 100,000 people will leave. And the hole will only get bigger. And they just cannot seem to catch on. Fiscal condition, we rank 6th. Again, this would be the Mercatus Institute that looks at all states side by side, takes out their financial statements. Ahead of us would be Alaska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Nebraska. So you can see where our peer group would rank in their fiscal condition, the ability to perform. Overall freedom, this is the John Locke Foundation that looks at regulatory environment for the states, tax structure for the states, and choice in education, that parents would have a choice as to where to send their child to school. And Florida ranks #1 among all states for the best regulatory, tax, and education experience. So a question was asked, what about the federal government? It's a very different story, and it's not an attractive one. And let me be as fair as I can. I can't do it, there's only one, so I can't really plot that on a graph against its peers. But let me show you some things that I think would be important to understand. I'm going to start you in 1940, and I promise we'll go fast, okay? And we're going to look at three particular indicators: spending, revenue, and debt. In 1940, our spending, and everything, by the way, on the y-axis, everything on the vertical axis, everything on the left-hand axis, is going to be what that number is compared to the entire economy. What portionate share is our government of our entire economy? And of course, along the x-axis or the horizontal axis will be years in passage of time. So you can see in 1940, we had about a $98 billion economy, and spending was representing about 10% of that economy, and our revenue was 6.7%. We were coming out of a very difficult financial time for the country, fiscal time. And so we were spending a little more than we were taking in, a proportionate size. And then let's move along in time to see what starts to happen. 1945. Now, we know what happened in 1945. Western civilization and freedom of the world was literally at stake. So what happened in between 40 and 45 is the American people made a decision to invest in B-17s, B-24s, aircraft carriers, P-51 Mustang, Sherman tanks, and save the world. And people that would think it was obvious looking back should know that in 1940, the American military ranked 16th in size in the world, behind Romania. It was not a foregone conclusion. It was courageous people that did this. And we should all be proud. And I know we all are proud of that. But this is the choice we made. We went and indebted ourselves and drove up spending to do everything we can for specific assets to save a future. Now, but this is what's going to be interesting now, looking what's happened. When they came back, understanding the risk of doing that in the future would put a burden on a generation, and that was not the mindset. They could not do that. So they immediately tried to bring back spending in line with its revenue sources, and there how you can see move along to 1965. And in 1965, we would have about an $800 billion economy, which, by the way, is the size of Florida today. Our GDP today is about $830 billion. It would have been about the same size as the country would have been in 1965. So there's where we were, still moving along, and about this year is about 1965-67 would be when Lyndon Johnson and the Congress would begin the entitlement programs of Medicaid and Medicare, and you're going to see the impact of that shortly down the road. So let's move ahead in time. You bring us forth to 1980. We're creeping up on our spending. We're keeping a gap between spending and our revenue. That is going to hit a later slide when we look about the debt. If you're spending more than you're taking in, you're increasing a debt. Our economy now is about $2.8 trillion in size. So again, you can see us growing as a proportion of a growing economy. Bring you forward to 2000. You finally see the crossover. A Congress hands a president a balanced budget that actually spends less than it takes in. Interesting concept. And here we are now, bringing ourselves back to about an 18%. But remember, before all of this story began, we historically had run in that 10% before the war, and we did not bring ourselves back down to those levels. But at least we're now at a point where our spending is surpassing our expenses. And then let me just bring you forward. Now we're spending about 21% of total GDP is government spending, and revenue is 18%, so you see a gap. And you see a significant gap in just the years prior to where we are today. There's a misnomer about that, and I'll cover that in a minute about why that gap is so large. So let me now bring you in the big concern. I'm compressing this, and I'm now going to add debt. What is the country's debt to all of our economic activity, our GDP? So again, you can see a conscientious decision that we knew what we had to do when we did it. And we knew that if we did it and we could be successful, then we could worry about the future. What's impressive is how quickly they began to worry about the future. Those generations were bringing down the debt as a proportionate size of its GDP to bring that in line and not leave that for another generation. So you can see a significant drop in our debt as a percentage of our GDP. It would be, again, just you thinking about what is my household income compared to my debt? How can I carry that load on my back, and who's going to carry it after I'm gone? So here we are now. We're now down to 31% debt, 32% debt to GDP. When by the time we get to the same time point we stopped before in 1967, come forward now down to 25% in 1980. Moves up and then brings ourselves back down to about 31% at that point in 2000, 2001, when you saw that we finally had a budget that was once again providing for greater revenues than expenses. That is the last time, of course, that in 2001 that we performed that act of actually passing a budget that was spending less than it was taking in. So there you have it. Now, here's what's going to be the scary fact. Back in 1946, you actually again purchased the infrastructure to win a war. And you knew that the time would pass and you would then bring it back in line. This is now a very, very different story. That line that escalates up so quickly got us cash for clunkers. It did not create the superhighway infrastructure for tomorrow. It is a significant issue that is growing. If you were to include all the borrowed money that government borrows from itself, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, it's 99%. So you take yourself 98%, 99%. So you take yourself all the way back up, and then you wonder, well, what does the future hold? How do we get out of this? Well, coming back and just being disciplined is not going to be the answer now. So let me show you. This is a graph that just shows you by line item from the beginning in 1965, where I'm going to take you on this slide, to today. How has that line item grown from its beginning to today? So let's look at the first one, defense spending. Hasn't even grown twice over what it was. So when people start to talk about, well, that escalating line must have been because George Bush put us in 2 wars. That is not the case. Well, maybe it was that we were spending on infrastructure, education, and research. That wasn't the case. Social Security is now 6 times greater proportionate share of our budget than it was in 1965, but here you go. Medicare, 28%. Medicaid, 41%. That's what's growing. And tonight there's going to be a presidential debate, and regrettably, this will not be part of the conversation. And in fact, it's probably not even fit for children to watch. Or adults. But that's our problem. That's the situation we're in. And if we keep extracting, and again, I'm not making a statement as to the value of each of these initiatives, but when they won't even sit down and figure out how do we reform these so that the next generation, that debt, this is similar to buying lunch every day on a credit card. You've consumed it and the debt rises, but there's nothing to sell down the road. There's nothing to change down the road. But someone after you has to pay for it. We all know in this world, when I made a loan to somebody, I knew if they didn't have life insurance, I wasn't going to go after the children when the loan went bad after they passed away. But what we're doing, our children and grandchildren have to pay this. And that should really concern all of us. Because there's no kind of revenue growth rate that's saying we can absorb this. So I want to show you one other thing that I did to just try to illustrate. So far, this is just my definition. I'm sure it's not going to go anywhere in college notebooks and textbooks, but I call it the suffocation index, and this is my last slide for you. What I'm going to show you is the proportionate share that government is now extracting or taking from the growth rate of your household income. So if, in fact, instead of borrowing the money, they could not borrow the money, they had to just keep taxing you for it, we would stop this because you would say, enough. I actually want some of my income to stay with me so that I can have a future. But when we just allow our government to borrow it, we don't see it, and we pretend like it's not happening. But it is a burden, and it is crushing this economy running at a 1% growth rate that cannot allow us to get out of our own way. So here's what I'm going to show you first. So back from 1965, coming forward 50 years, your paycheck has grown from $45,000 on median to $56,000. So $11,000 in median household income growth over that period of time. And that is adjusted for inflation. Now I'm going to show you, If I just took, and people could quibble with my math, but I just took 20 years historically of growth rate and applied it to the next 30, adjusted, you're going to get 2,000 more in the next 30 years on current growth rates. So now the question will be, how fast will government grow if we know the household is only growing at X? Will our government commit to growing at a slower rate? The CBO has already projected out the next 30 years. This line represents what you get to keep after the government spends its money, your money. So this is actually saying that the differential, the gap between the two, is what you get to take home. So all of the growth between the two periods of time has grown to the growth of government and has not been able for a household to grow its capacity and its economic freedom. And if you project that number forward, the CBO spending, there'll be $11,000 left over after the growth rate of household income for the family to absorb. Now, I know we borrow, but imagine if we passed a law said, you guys cannot put any more of your spending nonsense on our grandchildren. You send me the check for all of it. This is what they'd be doing. And you would say, okay, well, then that's enough. I'm voting all of you out. But when we disguise things, when we subsidize things, we do great harm to the future of an economy. And that's what's happening here. So now let me just show you. Back in 1967, every household was contributing about $18,000 to keeping our government running out of its paycheck. Today, about $29,000, and in the future it'll be $37,000. And what's left over is what the household survives with. It's a big difference. It's a wholly different approach to understanding the fiscal discipline. Okay, so if I've depressed you enough, do I have time to take a question or two? Have I run it out? I'd be happy to try to take a question or two. Anything? Yes. Yeah, the question was how much is fraud apportionment? You know, I'm really disappointed. I fight fraud as your CFO, and every time I try to have this conversation with our federal government, they just say it's trivial, it's not a big deal. So they say we think it's about 10%. Well, the budget that Greg and Jim just passed was about $30 billion of Medicaid, our share of that. And that's $3 billion. Well, that $3 billion, as I already mentioned, would be about 65,000 school teachers every year. It's a big deal, but they're the ones who have to help us do it. They're the ones who enroll people into the program under their standards. And when we keep showing them the loopholes and really the crime that's taking place, it is a far less than the enthusiastic response that you would hope for. So it's a really big deal. In my opinion, 10% is a big deal. But okay, so what's the other growth? It really is. When we started Social Security in 1936 and set the age at 65, the average life of a male was 58. I mean, it was like, what a government benefit, you know? But today it's 79. And to not sit down and be able to have an adult conversation that the next generation cannot keep this going without some kind of means testing or some kind of reform is just incredible. It's a really good question. Yes, what else? Any questions for Jim or Greg? Yes?
Years ago, I heard an economist say that the federal spending does contribute to the GDP of the country. And he estimated that it was about 3%. Do you have any later numbers? Years ago, any later numbers? I mean, rule of law, safety, security, education, things like that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's more significant than that. We all would agree, I think, in this room, again, when these gentlemen did everything they could to bring down costs, they had to look at all these other things that we were doing for the public good. And that really is what you would expect. The value proposition to build the elementary school, to build the state road, to create highway patrol officers that were going to be available in there and safe for you, all those things. So when you think about those who, yes, help build the overpass that we have funded, who help build the university dormitories that we have funded through your generosity of tax dollar, there is GDP activity to that. So it can be significant. I think what we should be worrying about is the disproportionate share that it's becoming, because you just think about this. The question would be, and again, I hope you recognize the incredible state servants you have in this room. We used to be growing the state-run insurance program, Citizens Insurance, faster than any private sector player. And you would say to yourself, I'm glad there is an insurer of last resort, but why is it becoming the largest market share player? Well, because it froze its rates. Imagine somebody competing with you that freezes their rates. You'd say, you can't be serious. How do I compete? How does the private sector innovate when the big player steps on everybody and doesn't innovate? So the larger share we become, the whole conversation as to how innovative is that? What is the private sector contributing that? What's been extracted from me to run an inefficient operation that ultimately gets the road built or ultimately does that? The private sector in its competition is far more innovative, far more creative, far more persevering, far more critical of a timeline, far more critical of coming in under cost. And that's what should worry us, is just, hey, whoever builds it, it shouldn't matter. No, it really does matter. It really does matter. Yes. What else? Yes.
So on that note of who builds it, can you talk about public-private partnerships, what that means to the state and what it might mean to the federal government?
It's a really wonderful tool. And again, to credit to these legislators who would say, what we need is a dormitory. Do we really want to have us build it? Or could a private sector player design something? What if a private sector player actually managed it, and they worked on the housing price points, and they worked on the custodial services, and they sharpened their pencil? All we need is the service. I don't think you want us putting in a portfolio that we can just do it better than anybody else can. So it is a real value to getting best price and long-term maintenance and care. It can be. I mean, you could have a bad actor, and that happens, that doesn't do the job right, and then you have to deal with that. But for me to allow the debt to be placed on somebody else, but for us still to have access for student housing, and for somebody else to have to do the care and maintenance at the price point that the student can make it work, these could be really, really valuable to us. So Florida is trying to be more responsive to those ideas. Yes?
I'm a bit curious. There seems to be a competition between the state of Florida and Texas. And yet, they're on the bottom of the charts. They're doing well. The oil mess.
Yeah, right.
How do they possibly maintain that as you have here?
Well, I think it's such a really so the question was, we're competing with Texas, where there appears to be a lot of conversation. Governor Scott loved to have fun with Governor Perry at the time, and Governor Perry now tells him, I'm not the governor any longer. So he did talk about it a lot, and I think we also recognize it was an extraordinarily fast-growing economy. It was attracting a tremendous amount of capital, as you could see from a previous slide. What we're now observing is how significant, again, a particular industry was to the success of Texas. Just as we're realizing how important shale was to North Dakota, or just how you might see, again, certain petroleum products are to the state of Alaska. What we shouldn't be complacent, as fine a job as these talented folks have done for you, think about what happened to us in 2006. When you have an economy that is significantly driven by the capacity of other people to come and enjoy us, so we don't want to lose sight of the value of tourism. It's significant. 1/3 of all of our sales tax dollars comes from somebody visiting our state. We don't want to give that up. We don't want to shift that tax burden to everybody else. The significant presence of agriculture, the significance of second home building or construction building to take 365,000 people a year coming here. But if you lose sight of the fact how vulnerable we can be when something goes wrong around the world, this is our moment to think about how do we diversify Florida's economy for the next 30 to 50 years. Life sciences, energy, technology. Things that, again, that these individuals are trying to help all of us through our research, through our universities, research arms, and what we're trying to attract here Not just somebody that wants to come here, give them an incentive, but is it a player that would actually help us diversify our economy? If we do not do that, those who will stand here 15 years from now will show a slide and say, when they got back up on their feet, when they had things going right, why didn't they work harder to plan for the next cycles? We won't be ready for the next cycle because it's coming, but we should be ready for cycles in the future. And I think to see the vulnerability of Texas, but I would say to you, I still, as your CFO, when I see the revenue sources, I would like to see a far broader economy that would not be as vulnerable to a downturn. It's a really good question. And I think all of you should hold us accountable to that. Yes, sir.
A lot of people tell me, businessmen, that what attracts them to Florida or other states is the quality of their public education. And I didn't see any slide about explaining that relationship.
Sure.
And I'm kind of prejudiced because I'm on the school board in Manatee County and would like to be competitive.
Could I take 1 second to thank you? Because had I been given 2 hours, I promise you I had a slide. Yes. So I have a slide, and maybe if I'm ever invited back, which might be really questionable now. But I'd have a slide, and I would take you from 1994 to today. In 1994, Florida ranked 45th in fourth grade reading. 45th in fourth grade reading. And being the chair on the school board, I'm a finance person, but everybody told us, if you can't read by the fourth grade, you're not going to be an astronaut. So things began to change, and instead of us, and we had, by the 3 previous decades, we had funded education usually 2 to 3 times faster than the inflation rate, okay? And people said that wasn't enough, and I get that, and I can respect that. But in 1998, what was passed was an accountability measure that all grades for all schools would be posted in a newspaper. That brought stress. It then went that there'd be a McKay scholarship would be available to children with learning disabilities, that their parents could choose the school of their choice. Then it was passed that you could do homeschooling. Then it was passed that you could choose virtual schooling. Then it was passed that there would be merit pay. Then it was passed that a low-income family could have a tax scholarship to go to the school of their choice. All of these things, which led the John Locke Foundation to rank us #1, that we had incredible teachers at our corner public school all over the place, and that parents had choices and options to participate in their child's education. Across that time, if I had brought that slide and hit this clicker, 45th, 40th, 30th, 15th, 10th, 8th in the country in fourth grade reading. That's choices that you should take credit for and you should be very proud of. Yeah. I think that's it. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
I want to thank the Chief Financial Officer. Thank you very much. And even though that was a little bit of doom and gloom, I know the CFO agrees with me that we live in the greatest state, in the greatest nation in the world. So anyone who doesn't believe that, we can go over to the USF Culinary Lab for some craft beers afterwards that our students made. I'm Casey Welch with the University of South Florida, Sarasota, Manatee, and I serve on the Lakewood Ranch Business Alliance, Government Affairs Council, the Government Issues Council of the Sarasota Chamber, and the Legislative Committee of the Manatee Chamber. And on behalf of all of those groups and the University of South Florida, thank you for coming down. We have a token of appreciation of one of our professors wrote a book about the history of St. Augustine for the 450 years, and we hope the Office of the Chief Financial Officer will accept this as gracious. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Now I have the casting.
In closing, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to Jeff Atwater and his entire team, and I can assure you we will be inviting you back. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our partners in today's luncheon, the Manatee Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. As you can see, it's pretty powerful when 3 business organizations get together. So thank you guys for your partnership today. I'd also like to just take a moment to remind everyone to make sure and cast your vote on November 8th. And if you reside in Manatee County, it's important that you support the extension of the school surtax and the surtax for Manatee County, both of which will have a tremendous impact on businesses here in Manatee County. I know Forward Manatee also has some information over in the lobby area. Both the Lakewood Ranch Business Alliance as well as the Manatee Chamber of Commerce have both endorsed and support both of these taxes. We'll have a great rest of the day, and we all look forward to seeing you at a future event. Take care.